applications that have users collaborating with one another will typically offer some sort of a messaging capability. Whether it's through comments or DMs, mentions in posts, users are somehow able to send a message, get a message out to one or more other people. You can also build an entire application that's all about the messaging. So think Slack or Microsoft Teams or an entire inbox system. So if you're looking to build an application that's all about the messaging or has messaging features, this is the video for you, because we're going to walk through step by step how to put together the most common features for messaging in a real bubble editor. We'll look at DMs, right? Private messages between two people. We'll look at group messaging, mentions, notifications. We'll take a look at the design so that you can make this really interactive. And we'll also make sure to consider the logic around performance and enabling user-based permissions. Okay, so the first place we're going to start is with the data structure. This is where we begin with any type of application so we can get organized. All right, let's dive in. So here's our demo messaging application. And before I dive into the editor to go through the data structure, I want to show you real quick on the front end what we're going for so you can have some context and see how the data is actually going to be used. So what I've put together is a design that's similar to Slack. I'm currently logged in as Monica Geller here, and Monica is a part of 4 different group conversations as well as 3 different direct messages. These are private messages just between 2 people. And as I switch between the different conversations, I can see the messages within those threads. And over on the right-hand side, I also have some information about those threads, such as the members within a group. You can also see that I have some notifications here to let me know that I have some new messages I haven't yet read. Notice that when I click into it, it clears it out now that I've read it. We also have the ability to attach files to our messages if we want, okay? So that's just quick context for the features that we're going to be going through. We'll take a closer look at all of this as we move forward in the video, but let's start by going into the data structure. So I'm going to go back into my editor here. Under the data types, you can actually see that I'm only using 3 data types to get all of these features together, okay? The first one I want to look at is thread. So you can think of this as the parent record that organizes an entire conversation. Okay, this is not the actual messages themselves. So the thread is going to have a list of members. So I have it just pointing to my list of users. So everybody's going to be logged into an account, and they can all send their messages from their own user account. Okay, so list of users for members. And this can work for both private messages and group messaging. So the list can be just 2 people, or it can be more than 2 people. It'll support both of those structures. Now, just to make it easy for myself, I also have a yes/no field here to help me identify if this thread is a group thread or a private thread just between 2 people. And what this is mainly going to help with is this kind of design here, where I can very easily separate these are the group threads and these are the private threads, right? You can use this yes or no for a lot of different reasons. It's definitely a helpful field to include there. And if it is a group thread, then I have a text field to have a custom group name that any user can type in and be able to organize it so that it makes sense for everyone. So you can see here sales department versus managers versus marketing, and they can edit the names there. Okay, so there's that text field for that. The next data type is our message data type. So this is where you're going to create a separate message record in your database for every individual message that's created. So if we look at one of our threads here, okay, this is one message record. This is a second message record, a third, a fourth. If I go into the editor to the actual app data, you can see here are all of my messages that I have in the system across all of our conversation threads. Okay, and you can see there's a relationship between the content of the message and the thread that it belongs to. Let's go back to the structure here. Okay, so message has this relationship here to what I'm calling the parent thread, right? This is a relationship field to the thread data type. Then I have a regular text field for the actual content. So whatever the user is typing into the message box, we need to save somewhere. That's the field that we're going to save it to. And then optionally, we have a file field for an attachment if a user wants to attach a PDF or an image or something to their message. And we'll go into the design so you can see how to actually display the file and actually get the file in there. Okay. Now going over to the user data type, in addition to any other properties you need for the user, the only other field that I'm adding here is unread messages. And you can see that this is another relationship field to the message data type, and it is a list field, right? So when you create your field to your data type, make sure that you check this box so that you can allow for multiple values. Very similar to how within the thread we have a list of users, so we can allow for multiple members to participate in the thread. Okay, so this is going to be a field that's going to help us with notifications. Every single time a new message gets added to a thread, if the user is involved in that thread, then it's going to also be added to their list of unreads so that we can show them a little badge here, and it can make it really easy to identify which ones have messages they haven't seen yet. We will also be referencing fields like their name and their avatar, particularly for the design here, and also the mentions actually for the names. So that we can make things more interactive, make it really easy to identify who's who, especially in these group conversations. So we'll go through those as we move forward in the design. All right, two things following that data structure we just looked at. The first is that I intentionally did not add a list of messages field within the thread data type, and this was for performance reasons. It's really easy for a messaging application like what we've designed here to have a conversation build up to hundreds of messages between people, especially in a group context where the conversation is just ongoing. Okay, so it'll increase the size of the record. It could potentially slow things down in your app if you have a lot of threads like that. Okay, so we don't need to add hundreds and hundreds of messages to a single thread. As long as you have within the message data type a single relationship to its one parent thread, that's all you need to get all of the designs and logic together for what we're doing here. Now, for the second thing, even if you're not building a complete messaging application like we're showing here, and instead just have messaging features in your app, a lot of these data structures can still apply to you. So for example, let's say that you're building a social network app where you have comments that are added to a post. So the message thread structure will still apply. So instead of thread, you have post. Instead of message, you have comment. They're just different labels, but it's the exact same structure serving the same purpose, right? Your post is your primary entity that you are commenting on, just like a thread is the conversation that you're adding messages to. Also consider a CRM where you want to add notes to a contact, right? The contact is that primary record that organizes all of the notes that are going to be attached to it. And if you're interested in seeing those designs and those structures in those contexts, we do have separate videos on how to build a social network app, how to build a CRM app, so you can check those out after this one. All right, so now let's take a look at how we've put together these front-end designs so that you can make everything really interactive for your users and so that you can separate threads from the actual messages within the thread. All right, so you'll see here in our demo application, the design has been put together as a 3-column structure where the first column is a way to access all of the different conversations we're a part of. And by we, I mean the person who is currently logged in. I'm currently logged in as Monica, so these are the group conversations that Monica is a part of, and these are the direct messages that Monica is a part of. You can also create a new group conversation or a new direct message by clicking on that plus icon. In the middle, we have all of the messages that are tied to the selected thread. We, of course, have our input down below so that we can type in a new message. We have a file uploader so that we can attach a file to our message if we want. And then, of course, our send button to add the message to the conversation. On the right column, we have just any detail that you want to add for the thread. This is a good spot for it. So in a group setting, we have an input to enter in the group name or edit the group name, and then a search box that we can add more users to the conversation, plus see all of the people who are a part of this conversation here. The delete this conversation text will open a pop-up to just double confirm that this is an action they want to take. Clicking on delete, right, this final confirmation button will actually do several things. We'll go over this flow here when we touch on the workflows. But this is a great way to make sure that the user isn't accidentally removing something they mean to keep, okay? And this is also a function that is only available to the person who created the conversation. All right, so jumping into the editor here, this is how I've laid out these different components. The first container or group that I always add to any page design, no matter what type of app, is one like this. I've called this group main. And this is really just serving as the parent container so that I can have specific margins at the page level, and then I can organize subgroups within it. So this group main in my case is set up as a row. That way I can have other groups inside of it stack horizontally. And so the two groups in this case is my group sidebar, right? You can see the highlight there, that's this left panel. And then I have one group that actually contains both the middle and right panels. So I've called this selected thread. And I've done that because this group here for selected thread is going to act as a data source for all of the elements within it to reference the selected thread. And we'll go over how to define the data source in the workflow section of this video a little bit later here. Now you can see that selected thread is actually broken down into two subgroups. Okay, let me collapse these down here. So I have group messages, which is my center panel. You see that I have a shape just to create a little bit of visual separation for the user. And then another group here on the right called group thread details. Okay, so you see how I'm using containers to create very specific row and column structures. It's really just a mix and match of the row layout style and the column layout style, right? Even though group thread details is technically a part of a row overall, inside of this is actually set up as a column so that everything inside of it can stack vertically. So you can definitely mix and match those and play around with the spacing in between the elements inside of the container, the distribution, the alignment, right? That way you can position things exactly how you want. All right, so let's jump back over to our sidebar to see what we have going on here. I'm going to open this up here in the elements tree. So my first set of elements is just a label plus a plus icon, so that when I click on this icon, I can create a brand new conversation thread that I can start adding messages to. Again, we'll take a look at the workflow attached to this icon in a moment. Down below, I have a repeating group. Okay, it doesn't look like a repeating group right now because we're only seeing sort of one cell for it, but this is a repeating group of all of the threads the user belongs to. Okay, so the type of content is thread, and my data source is going to search for threads where the members contains the current user. Okay, this prevents me from seeing threads where I am not a member. And because I am separating the threads between the group threads and the direct messages, I'm also going to look for threads specifically where group equals yes. So I have a very similar structure down below for direct messages. If we go down to the repeating group for the direct messages here, you'll see that I still have a search. I still need to make sure the thread contains myself as a member, but here the group equals no. So this changes the search results and we get exactly what we see here, right? Only the group conversations compared to the direct message conversations. At the end of the day, all of these are technically threads, but this allows me to have a little bit more control over the design. Now, once I'm inside of that repeating group cell, again, I can display whatever I want. So this text here for the group, it's going to prioritize itself by displaying the parent group's threads group name. Okay, that's that text field under the thread data type. And if the group name doesn't have a name yet, we're going to default it to, I've just typed in here, unnamed group. Let me show you where this kicks in, this defaulting situation. Let me refresh the page here. And again, I'm logged in as Monica. I'm going to click on this plus icon. Notice that instantly I have a new group added to my list here called unnamed group. That's because I haven't yet had a moment to type in a new group name. I just clicked on this button here. Okay, so once I do type in a group name, let's call this Monica's group, like this. All right, now you can see that has updated. So that also triggered a workflow there to update that. We see that in real time getting reflected in the design there. So by default, or I should say the priority is to go to the thread's group name because that's the user's customization. But if this is empty, we're going to run this fallback operation that Bubble has called defaulting to, and then you just type in whatever text you want to fall back to or default to if and only if the primary field that you're pointing to is empty. Okay, if we have a group name, then it will always show the group name. Similarly, for the direct messages, we don't have a group name here, but we can show the user's name that we are talking to because it's a private one-on-one conversation only. So I'm going to go to the threads list of members. Okay, this is a list of users. I'm going to subtract myself out. I'm going to say minus item. This is an operator here. Minus item. The item I want to subtract out is myself, the current user. And so what am I left with? If I know the direct message thread is only going to have 2 people in it, I'm pointing to both people, then removing myself, I'm left with the other person. I don't need to see my own name in this panel here. So I'm removing myself so that I know that the only other person that is left in this expression, right, this list field, is the member that I'm speaking with. So I do have to go to first item here so that I can convert the value back to a single value rather than a list of one. I could technically say first item or last item. It's the only item left, so it'll give me the same result. And then I'm going to navigate to the actual text field that I want to print here in this text element. Okay, so in my case, I want to show the full name of that one member in this thread. And again, let's say for whatever reason the user doesn't have a full name, or if you've created the direct message by clicking on the icon, you haven't yet created the member to add to it, right? They're not going to have a name yet. And so we will fall back on the word draft. I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, so again, I'm logged in as Monica, and if I wanted to create a new direct message, I'm going to click on the plus icon, and you can see a new draft has been created because I don't yet have another member whose name I can show. So if I wanted to create a direct message with Chandler, I'll search for Chandler over here on the right, select his name, and now he's been added to the thread. And that means our expression that shows the name is going to go back to the priority field, which is the member's full name, okay, rather than that draft word there. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this helpful, take a look at our free extended workshop over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, where we'll guide you through our 4-phased approach for going from idea to app. So if you're looking for a complete start to finish guide, you're really going to enjoy this workshop. We've got a lot of great stuff in there for you. The link is on the screen and in the description below. Okay, so now looking at this center panel, remember we have this group here, group selected thread, that technically contains the center and the right column. Looking at just the center group, which I've called group messages, notice that the type of content is defined here for group messages to thread, and the data source is set to parent group's thread. The parent group is, right, its most immediate parent, this one here, group selected thread. This one also has type of content thread, but notice the data source is empty. This data source is going to be defined dynamically in the workflows. Whenever the user clicks on any one of the thread titles here, it will set the data source for this group so that that reference can trickle down all the way into the inner elements. Everything that happens within this particular center container can reference the correct thread that the user wants to look at. If they click on a different thread, it resets the data source to that thread instead, and everything reflects, right? That's how we're able to see different messages show as soon as I click. Click on general discussion, it's going to define the data source of this center group, and then therefore the messages will be tied to that conversation. If I switch over to Joey, it's again going to change it, right? The messages change for us here. Okay, so within this selected group, again, we have the messages, and this is also made up of 2 inner groups. We have the repeating group of our dynamic list of messages, and then down below, another group here to organize all of the input information and the button to send the message. So for the repeating group, you can see that the type of content is message, because that's ultimately the list that we want to show, the list of records we want to show. And the data source has to match that type of content, and it has to be a list. So here we're performing a search. The result of a search is always in a list format. So I'm searching for messages where the parent thread equals the parent group's thread. So the parent thread here on the left-hand side of the equal sign, this is referencing the message field that I have in the data structure, right? If we go back to the data type, we're looking at the parent thread where we're searching for messages where the value of this field equals whatever the data source is that's been defined here, right, at this level, right, the right-hand side level of our group in the workflow, okay? So repeating group is finding those messages. Now, once we've found those messages, everything you design inside of your repeating group cell, you can see that I have a group here. This is really to help with my spacing on the left and right sides, and also on the top and bottom, create a little bit of space between each message. This is per message. So inside of this group, you can see the type of content is message. The data source now is the current cell's message because I'm inside the repeating group cell. And within that, I have more combinations of columns and rows to create this particular layout where the avatar is on the left-hand side. We have the name next to the time, but both of those are above the content. Okay, so play around with your rows and columns so that you can position things exactly how you need. So from the perspective of the message, if I wanted to show the user who created the message, right, the author's photo, I need to first use an image element, which is what I have here. And the dynamic image is going to be the group messages creators avatar. Okay, the parent group's message is referring to this group here, which is referring to the cells message. Remember, the repeating group is a list of messages. We've sort of departed from the list of threads. We're looking for messages tied to a specific thread. So once we get down to the image, we're looking at the messages creators avatar. The messages creators avatar. That creator field is built in. It's built into every single data type that you have. You'll always have the creator. And then the avatar is just an image field that I have on the user data type. Okay. And then over to the right of that, we have similar expressions to get to other fields. The messages creator's full name. We have the messages creation date, right? We don't need to go to the creator. We don't want to look at the creation date of the user. We want to look at the creation date of the message. And then I've just formatted this to show the time, but you can of course format it however you'd like. And then down below that, I have the messages content. The messages content. I'm going to talk about what I'm doing with the find and replace here a little bit later when we go over the mentions feature. Now you'll also see in my elements tree here, I actually have a hidden link element in the design. Let's open this up here. This will optionally show below the content if the message has a file attachment. Okay, so by default under the layout tab, this is actually not visible on page load. I've deselected this checkbox. And I'm also collapsing the element when it's hidden so that we don't end up with extra white space if we're not looking at it. So the condition is what makes this text, or this link I should say, visible to the user. When the parent group's messages attachment is not empty, right? That's the file field I created under the message data type. When the attachment is not empty, then we're going to change the visibility property so that it is visible. Okay, attachment may or may not have a value. All right, and so this link element will then display to the user the word file, and then it's going to dynamically insert the attachment's file name. This is a built-in state that Bubble has when you reference file fields. So I just want to show the file name for context, and I'm going to have the user open it as an external URL because typically files are, they may trigger an automatic download with your browser, or the browser can preview an image or preview a PDF. So we just want to take the browser to whatever it wants to do, however it handles the URL. So I'm going to say external URL, parent groups messages, attachments URL. This is another built-in state for files. Okay, as long as you have a file field, you'll have file name and URL that come with it. And I want to open it up in another tab so that they don't lose their place with where they were in the application. Okay, so now down below we have a group here that I've called group input to organize my input plus any action items I want to take with the sending of this message. So this is just a regular multi-line input. I've actually removed all the borders so that this group actually has the borders I need to create more of like a seamless text box. It kind of makes it look like the icons are inside of the input when technically the input is going to end right above it and we don't have anything taking up this middle space here. So this is a multi-line input for them to type in as much as they want. And then down below that, I have another group simply to organize my icons in a row layout where they're spaced apart like this. Okay. On the right, I have an icon that the user can click on to trigger the sending of the message. So we'll look at that in a moment when we go through workflows. And over on the left, I have slightly unique kind of design here. Let me open this up in the elements tree. So I have this group uploader here. And this group uploader element, the layout is set to align to parent. And the reason I did this is because I'm actually combining two elements within it that I want to overlap with one another. So I have a file uploader, which is going to be transparent to the user. Okay, notice there's no placeholder. I don't have any background color or anything. It's transparent to the user. And this is going to overlap this icon. It's going to sit on top of it. If you think of like in Z space, right? They're layered on top of each other. So the file uploader is on top of the icon so that when the user clicks on it, it looks like they're just clicking on the icon when really they're clicking on the file uploader so that it can automatically trigger the device's file manager. Now, once the user does upload a file, if they want, I have two other conditional elements that will appear. The first is the name of the file, just to help the user out, give them some context, understand what they uploaded. Okay, notice that in the layout style, it's also hidden by default. It collapses when hidden. You typically want to do that with elements that are going to be hidden. And conditionally visible. So here's my condition. File uploader's value is not empty, right? We have a file. Then we're going to make the file name visible. And then very similar to that, we have an icon under the same rules. Okay, so it's not visible on page load. And then the condition that looks to the file uploader that's over here on the left. If this value is not empty, then we make the icon visible. Okay, now looking over at the third column that we have here, which I've named group thread details. This is also going to hold a few other conditional elements. So we have two main ones. We have one here called group thread. Okay, you can see that this just contains this text, this label text, as well as an input so that they can enter in a group name, and then another shape that's in between there, and then our members group. Now, we don't always want to see the group name group. If we're in a direct message situation, this is going to go away. I'm going to show you here. Right? I'm speaking with Joey Tribbiani. I don't see the group information because this isn't a group technically. If I go over to general discussion, then those things come back. The label, the input, and even the shape. Okay, going back to Joey so you can see the difference. Right? So, and notice how all of this content shifted up and we didn't leave that white space up above there, and that's because of the collapse option. Okay, so the group thread container is not visible on page load. It collapses when hidden. And the condition is going to be if the parent group's threads group is yes, right? This is our yes/no field, which we also use for the repeating groups over here on the left. If we are looking at a group thread, then we're going to make this visible so that they can work with the group name. And I have the exact same thing here set up for the shape. Okay, this input for the group name, it's just a regular single line input. And I have this set up to auto bind to the group's name field. You don't have to auto bind it. You can use a workflow to automatically save the group name when they type it in. But auto binding is a helpful feature for not having to create a workflow and making sure you enforce different user permissions. And that's the path that I took here. We're enabling auto binding so that whatever they type in is going to bind itself to the group name field of the thread data type. Now, in order to auto bind, you do have to have privacy rules set up. So going over to the data tab, to the privacy sub tab, you can see under thread, I have privacy rules applied. These are basic rules. You can definitely get more customized and more granular with them. But this is going to give me the ability to auto bind and also just make sure that I only have access to the threads that I'm a member of. So I have two rules right now. I have one called creator. Okay, so anytime you define a new rule here, you would give it a rule name that's just internal for you. And the definition that I'm creating to support this rule name is going to be this thread's creator is the current user, right? You basically want to ask yourself what defines a creator? Well, as long as the thread's creator field, which is a built-in from Bubble, matches the current user, then we know that we are the creator of this thread, right? The person who's logged in. And so I should be able to do everything. I can view all the fields. I can find it in any searches. It's my thread that I created. And I'm going to allow auto binding for the group name. I left these other ones unchecked because I just don't have auto binding set up for them. So I really only needed this one here for group name. If I have an account with the application and I'm logged in, but I'm not a part of the thread, let alone its creator, then I'm going to fall under the everyone else default permission, right? Anyone who is a member but not a creator, and actually I'm noticing right now I need to be a bit more specific with my expression here, but those users will not be allowed to auto bind. They can see everything, but they can't modify. So I think a more accurate description of the member is this thread's members contains the current user, and this thread's creator is not the current user, right? They're just a regular member of the thread. They can see everything, but they can't auto bind. It is assumed that the thread's creator is also a member. I don't really have to mark that in here. Okay, so now back to my group thread details design here. Let's look at the members section. I have this group here, which is going to contain my label that says members. I have a search box down below, and this is actually conditionally visible. And then I have another repeating group of the members to display for this particular thread. Okay, let's start by looking at the search box. This search box element allows you to create that sort of autocomplete functionality. So let me go over to Monica's group. Let me refresh the page here. All right, so if I go to Monica's group and I add Chandler here, you see how I don't even need to type in the full name. It's going to start to autocomplete for me, bold what matches, and start to show me some results that match that even in a partial word search. Okay, and as soon as I click on it, it's actually going to trigger a workflow to make sure that this user is associated with the thread. All right, so there's the search box. Now, this is conditionally visible, okay? By default, it's hidden. Again, it collapses when hidden, but it's going to be visible in two different scenarios here. You have two conditions. The first is if I created a direct message with another person, then I'm allowed to add that person to the direct message, right? Because I'm getting it started. So here's my condition, very similar to how we did the privacy rule. If the current user is the selected threads creator, okay, so basically if I'm the creator, and the thread's list of members only has one member, right? The count is one, then I know that there's nobody in this conversation because I'm automatically going to be added as a member to my own direct message. If the count is one, then I'm the only person. And just to double check, as long as the parent group thread group field, that's that yes or no, is set to no, we know that specifically this is a direct message and we only have one person, which is myself because I was the creator of it, then I'm going to make this search box visible so that I can add my recipient to this list. And as soon as that one person is added, it's no longer going to pass this condition and it will go away, and it will prevent me essentially from adding more people to a direct message. In that case, I should really be creating a group. Okay, so here's the second scenario. If we're looking at a group thread, right, group is yes, and I am the creator of the group thread, then I also have access to adding more members. This is just a privilege I have as being the creator. Anybody who is not a creator of a thread will not be able to add more members. They can just view the members that are in the thread. Okay, so if, for example, I run as a different user, and that general discussion group, I believe, involves everyone. So let's run as Rachel right now. Okay, so if we go over to the general discussion, all right, notice that I don't have that search box to add more people because I'm not a creator. I also want to point out that the input here has been disabled for me. I can't change the name. That is only going to be available for the creator of the group. Okay. All right. Now moving on to the area below that section here. This is a repeating group, right? Another repeating group of our members inside the selected thread. So I want you to see how I'm not doing a search. This is going to help you with performance. It's going to help you use less workload units. I'm not doing a search for those members because I don't have to. I have a shortcut to the members from the thread. So my list of users or my type of content that I want to work with here is user. And the actual data source of which users I want to show is the parent group's threads members. And inside of this repeating group, very similar to the group we saw within the message here, I have an image element to display the user's avatar, right? The parent group's user's avatar. At this point, we're working with the cells user. And then I have the user's full name to display there. And you'll see that I also have an icon over on the right-hand side to remove the member from the group if I want. And this is also a function that's only going to be available for the creator. So here you can see a condition that hides, see the visibility is turned off, hides this icon if the current user is not the creator. So you can enforce these different user permissions a few different ways. Now down below this section we have another hidden button that is called delete this conversation. Okay, this has an icon and a label. You see the design right there. And this is, again, only going to be visible for the creator of the thread. And when the user clicks on that button, we're going to reveal this pop-up right here as a double confirmation for, potentially a dangerous action. They don't want to accidentally delete a big conversation full of messages. So it's just going to ask them to double check. Are you really sure you want to delete this? because what we're going to do in the workflow is not only are we going to delete the conversation, but we're also going to remove all of the related messages and all of the related files. This way the database doesn't get clogged up with orphaned records or records that are never going to be referenced anymore. Okay, so I have two options that I can choose from. I can keep the conversation, in which essentially nothing changes, it just hides the pop-up, or I can choose to move forward with that operation and click on this here. So there's the structure of all of the designs that we have in our demo application. So you can see how rows and columns play a big part in creating a precise layout like this, as well as conditionals to show or hide certain parts of your design based on who the user is and what their relationship is to the data. All right, so now we're going to go into the heart of these features, which is the logic. The workflows are what really bring everything to life. So creating the actual messages in the database with the right content, making sure that data is passed around properly, that notifications are accurate for the user who's logged in, and things like that. So we'll look at every workflow step that we've put into these demo features so that you can follow along and implement it in your own app. Let's take a look. All right, so for the workflows, we're going to start with the left-hand side and then kind of work our way over to the right for all of the functionality here. Let's look at the plus icons for creating new conversation threads, starting with the group conversation. So when this plus icon is clicked, this is going to, right off the bat, create a new thread record in the database. So you can find this under the data category, create a new thing, creating a new data entry. And the thing we want to create is a thread. So we'll have to select our thread data type here. And at this point, I know two things. I know that I can add myself as a member because it's a thread I'm creating. So the members field will add the current user. Okay, you'll always have this data source as a shortcut. We're adding a single item to the list. And because I clicked on this icon that was next to my group label here, I know that I want to add a group thread. So I'm going to set the group field, this is that yes or no, to yes. Okay, if we, just real quick before we move on to the second action, if I compare that to the add DM icon here, so this is the other plus icon just down below, the difference is that the group field is going to be set to no. That's the only difference. We're still creating a thread, we're still adding ourselves as a member. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the first plus icon. So the second step is to display data in my selected thread group. Remember, my selected thread group is this one over here. Everything that I have happening inside of this container needs to reference the selected thread. And even though I'm not selecting one technically from the creation, I'm helping the user get started with sending a message or adding a member as soon as it's created, so they don't have to double click, from the list panel over here. So at the same time as creating, I'm also selecting it automatically. So I'm going to show you one more time here. If I click on the plus icon, okay, notice that this is already selected. The messages from before go away, whatever conversation I was on before, and I'm already able to start editing it. If I don't display that data through the workflow action, it would have remained on the previous thread that I was on, and it would have added it to this list, but I would have needed to then click again to this here. It may seem very minor, but those things can really add up. So we're helping our user with convenient kind of automations in our flows here, this smart logic for them. So display data, all this means is that we're defining a data source in a container. We're defining a data source in a container. So in some cases, you may already know your source. For example, this repeating group here, we know that the source is a search, so we can put the search directly in here. It's always going to be that source. But for the selected thread, that source is going to change. Every single time the user changes their mind on which group they want to see or which conversation they want to see, the data source here changes. So we don't want to define anything that's going to be fixed there. Instead, we're going to allow the workflow to update the data source. That's all it does. It's changing the source that we would otherwise have here. Okay, so all I need to do is select the element. In this case, it's the selected thread group, and what data I want to display. In this case, it's going to be the result of step one, my brand new thread that I created, right? Because group selected thread needs to reference a single thread. The exact same thing, like I said, is happening with the add DM, nothing different, same group, referencing the result of step one. All right, so now we're going to look at selecting an existing group before we were creating a group. So very similar in terms of defining data sources. I'm going to select this group here. We have two of them, right? One for groups, one for direct messages. Go to the workflow. You can see the very first thing is we're going to display data. And in this case, it's just the current cells thread, right? It's the group that I've just chosen. That's the thread that I want to send over to my selected thread group so that it has that data source there. Now, I'm also doing that for the DM, exact same thing. And both of these are also going to make a change to the user. What we're going to do here is we're going to modify the unread messages list. Okay, so I'm jumping ahead just a little bit here, but it is a part of this particular action. I want you to notice something here. I'm currently logged in as Ross, I believe. Or no, sorry, I'm currently logged in as Rachel. And I can see that I have one new message from Monica in my direct message with her. So as soon as I click on this here, that badge goes away, because what happened is I've cleared out the unread messages for this particular thread from my unread message list. Remember, there is a list field within the user data type here. As soon as I select the message, we remove the messages that belong to that selected thread. I might still have other unread messages for other threads. Those are not getting touched. They're going to stay in this list. But I'm going to remove the ones from the thread that I selected, just to help the user understand, okay, you've now read them because you've opened up this thread. Okay, so I'm going to show you here first how we display the badge, and then I'll take you back to that workflow action because I think it'll make a little bit more sense if we go in that order. So let me reveal the badge here. Notice that this is hidden by default because we don't always need to show the badge. Okay, on page load it's hidden, and it does collapse when hidden. So the actual text itself, this is just a text element with a roundness of 100 so that it looks like a circle, right? Just want to make sure that the dimensions width and height are set to a perfect square so that when you have a high roundness setting that it looks like a perfect circle here. And I've also got a background color on it. Okay, so my expression to show the accurate number for the user who's logged in is the following. I'm going to take the current user's list of unread messages, right? All of my messages across all of my threads, and filter them to just the parent group's thread. This way I only see, numbers that are relevant to this thread versus to this thread, because I could have very different counts of those unread messages per thread. So the current user's unread messages filtered, and then I want to count them up. And so Bubble will output a number for me to display there. And this is only going to be visible, here's our condition, as long as that count is greater than 0. Right? As long as I have at least one unread message, then I care to see the badge. If I don't have any unread messages, I don't want to see this here. So this is the same expression, but I'm doing a comparison. I'm taking the count and comparing it to the number of 0. If the count is greater than 0, then I want to make it visible. Okay, so that's how we show the badge. And I'm going to take you back into the workflow to explain how we remove messages for that specific thread. So I'm modifying the user record. The field I want to modify is the unread messages field, and I'm running a remove list operation because I want to remove potentially more than one unread message from this list. And it's okay if there's only one unread message or even 0. This action will be harmless in that case, but we want to make sure that we cover all of our bases. So I'm going to remove a particular list. The list is going to be the user's unread message list filtered by the thread. So it's only going to remove messages for this particular thread. It will leave any other unread messages from other threads untouched. All right, now let's move into the workflow for the center panel here. So again, we have our multi-line input. They can type in, paragraphs of content if they want. We have our file uploader and our send. Let's start with the file uploader. So this is an input, right? The file uploader itself is an input. As soon as the user clicks on it, they'll see their device's file manager, whatever that might look like. And when they select a file, we'll see the file name. We'll also see this X icon. If I click on the X icon, let's say, never mind, I don't want this file there anymore. I'm going to edit the workflow here. This is going to do two things to reset. The first is to delete the file. We don't want this, unwanted file hanging around in our file manager in our app taking up valuable space. So you want to make sure that you always delete files if they're going to get cleared out. So you can find that under data and then here delete an uploaded file. So all this needs to reference is the file itself, so we'll point to the file uploader's value. I'm also going to reset the uploader This is that group, that aligned to parent group that holds the icon element as well as the file uploader, just so that the file uploader clears out its input and I can start again with a new file if I wanted. Okay, now if I go to the send icon, oops, over here, there we go. This is going to do a few things. First thing is it's going to create a new message. Okay, we know several things about this message already. We know the thread that it belongs to. It's simply the parent group's thread that the icon is sitting inside of. We know the content of the message. It's just a text field that's literally just the multi-line inputs value. And then optionally, the attachment is going to equal the file uploader's value. If the user never uploaded a file, then this will remain empty, and that's okay. After we create the message, it's going to reset the inputs so that it gives the user a visual cue that everything went through. And we're also going to update all members of our conversation, right, of this thread, and add our brand new message to their list of unread messages, right? So imagine I'm in a conversation with 10 people. I create a brand new message. I need to alert all 10 people. So I'm going to make a change to a list of users. Okay, be careful to choose the right one. Change to a list of things. In this case, my type of things is user, and my specific list is the threads list of members, right? That's the list of users field. And I'm going to remove myself. I don't need to add my own message to my list of unreads. So I'm going to subtract myself out. And so I'm left with everybody else in the conversation. So all of these users are going to undergo and experience this same change, which is the unread messages field is going to add one more message to their list. Okay, in this case, the message to add is the result of step 1. Okay, so that's sending the message. And it's not really sending it anywhere. It's just adding a new message record to the database. And as soon as that happens, it's going to appear here in the repeating group of messages because Bubble is essentially doing this real-time search for messages that match the thread. Okay. All right, so there's the workflow for that one. Now, over on the right-hand panel, we have an input for the group name. Like I said, this is actually auto-binding to the thread element, and we've specified the group name is the field that it will attach itself to. So remember, you do need to have privacy rules enabled for this to work here. So there's no workflow to look at for this one here. Okay, now for the members, adding more users, this is a search box element. It's not a regular input. It looks like an input, but it's actually a search box. So what happens for the workflow here? I'm going to right click and select Start Edit a Workflow to take me to it. As soon as the user has chosen a user that they've looked up, okay, it's going to run these actions. The first action is to modify the thread and add the search box value, which in this case is just a user, add it to the thread's list of members. Okay, remember they're typing in a name, they're searching for somebody. As soon as they select someone, we're going to add that selection to the thread's list of members. This is set up to search through all users, and you can see that I've also excluded the current user via their unique ID because I don't have a way to say minus item or anything like that, so I have to go off of a property to identify the user and remove them. This is basically a not equals symbol here. So I can't find myself in the list. I can only find other people. And as soon as they select someone, the search box will hold a value of that user, that single user. And so we're making a change to the thread, and the members list in that thread record is going to add the search box's value. And then the second action is simply to reset the input. It'll just clear out the selection from the search box so it gives the user a visual cue that it went through. Okay. Now for the removal of the member, we're basically just going to do the opposite. So let's go to the workflow for this icon. We're going to make a change to the thread. Okay, and you can see I'm locating the thread by going to the selected threads thread. There's lots of different ways that I can get to that data source, but this is always a fallback. Remember, this is that kind of first container that references the thread overall, but there's lots of other containers within these groups that also reference it. So I could have, specified any other group as long as we're talking about the same thread here. And the field I'm going to modify is the members list, and I'm going to remove the parent group's user, right? The parent group talking about the cells member that we're in here in this repeating group. There's no inputs to reset because I didn't interact with any kind of input, so this is a very simple one action operation here. Now let's go over to delete this conversation. Okay, so when I click on this, I'm not actually deleting anything, but I am showing a pop-up to help the user confirm that operation. So this is a show action. We'll select the pop-up, and I am going to pass information to the pop-up. So exactly how we've sent data to the selected thread where we say display data, I'm doing the same thing over here. When I show the pop-up, I'm displaying data in the pop-up, because the pop-up, we can't fix a specific conversation to this. It's going to be dynamic always. Every time we show it, we need to make sure that we send the conversation that the user is currently looking at. So as long as the type of content is set, we'll be able to do this. The data source can be empty here because we're defining it in the workflow. Display data in the pop-up, the data to display is the parent group's thread. Parent group, again, referencing the parent element of the delete button. Okay, and two options here. If they click on keep the conversation, it's just going to hide the pop-up. Nothing else happens, right? No changes. Versus if they click on the final delete, we're going to have several things happening here, right? We can mark this as red just to show this is kind of a dangerous operation because we're deleting a lot of different data. There are several things happening. I'm going to skip first step for a moment and go through all of the other actions. Okay, the first step is referring to deleting files, but let's actually start with step 2 here. This is going to delete all of the messages that are a part of the thread. So all I need to do is navigate to delete a list of things. Okay, the actual list is going to be a list of messages, and we can reference our repeating groups list of messages. This is talking about, or let me close the pop-up here just to show you again where it takes us. Reveal the element, this repeating group. Okay, we want to delete all of the messages in this repeating group, which has already done the search for us to find messages for this thread. So that's why I'm not doing another search here. I don't need to. And that's going to help with your performance and your workload consumption. Then I'm going to delete the thread, which I can reference from the pop-up, the pop-up's thread. Okay, so I'm deleting files, then messages, then the thread. And I'm doing it in that order, right, where the thread is last, because I need to reference the thread in order to find the messages and in order to find the files. The files are also attached to messages, and that's why the files actually come first before the messages go away. Okay, then I'm going to delete the pop-up and then update the data source of the selected thread, because I've just deleted my thread. So now what am I going to see in that group? It's going to just be empty. So I'm going to help the user with another kind of quick automation step to automatically select the next thread in their list. So here, my data to display is just to help us find the next thread in the list. So I'm actually going to combine the lists that I have in the group list here and the direct message list. Remember, these are two repeating groups. Okay, so I'm going to take repeating groups, threads, list of threads, merge it with repeating groups, threads, list of threads. Okay, this is for the DM, and the first one's for the groups. And whatever is the first item from that combined list, that's what I want to display. It doesn't really matter which one it is. We just want to show something. And the reason I'm merging and then showing the first item is because they may not have group conversations. Maybe they only have DMs, or the opposite. Maybe they only have group conversations and no DMs. We can never know, because that's something that's going to be unique to every user. So I'm just going to combine both of them. Even if one list is totally empty, I'll still end up with the other list. And I'm just going to grab the first one that's in that list. Okay, that's my logic there. And you can manipulate that if you prefer to not show anything and instead show an empty state design that says, hey, select a thread before you can move forward, something like that. That's perfectly fine too. And you'll actually see that my default selection for the thread, actually I have it in the workflow here, as soon as the page is loaded, I'm going to automatically select, again, the first thread that shows up in between these two lists. All right, so just to show you here, I'm currently on unnamed group. If I refresh the page, it should be showing me there we go, the first group here is the sales department, so it's automatically selected that for me. Okay, so jumping back into this workflow here on step 1, where we're deleting the files, this is going to involve a backend workflow, and you do need to be on a paid plan in order to run the backend workflows. So just be mindful of that. You can be on the free plan and set them up, but you won't be able to run them. And I have a separate tab open here on my backend workflows, which you can access from your page drop-down list at the very bottom. Okay, and I have this backend workflow called delete file. The reason I'm setting this up as a backend workflow is because we can only delete files one at a time. Under the data action, Bubble has this function here to delete an uploaded file, and for any given conversation, that we're about to delete, the number of files involved is unknown. It's a dynamic number. So unfortunately, we don't have a delete a list of files to kind of just do it all in one. We do have to go through one by one through the backend workflow. So this is how you would set this up. My API workflow here, right? You click to add a new workflow, select new API workflow. I've given it a name of delete file, and I've created a parameter, right? It adds these little fields here. I've created a parameter called file, type file. This is just an internal ID for my parameter, and the format of this parameter is going to be a file. All this is it's a way for the page to pass information to the backend workflow, because backend workflows are detached from your pages. So when from the page we trigger this backend workflow, we have a way to send a file to this endpoint here. Okay, and all this endpoint is going to do is run that delete action to delete that one file. Okay, so you can see here's my parameter reference, the value of the parameter. That's all this is doing. So at the page level, I'm going to select the following action under custom events. Schedule an API workflow, or in other words, a backend workflow, on a list. Again, my conversation, which we're about to delete, could have more than one. So I want to make sure, more than one file. I want to make sure that I get all of them. So on a list, I've got it set up here. So what type of list is this going to be? It's a list of files. What is the list of files that we want to run on? So here I'm going to reference my repeating group of messages. Again, this is going to this repeating group in my center panel. Okay, so that list of messages, list of attachments, right? Each message could have an attachment associated with it. So if messages 1 and 5 have an attachment, but 2, 3, and 4 don't, then we will end up with only 2 attachments here. That's okay if not all of them have an attachment. But this ensures that I grab all of them for the conversation. The API workflow I want to run, or the backend workflow I want to run, is the one that I just showed you, the one I created called delete file. And here's my parameter with the name of the parameter and the type. I just happen to use the same word for it. And the value of this parameter is going to be this file, because I'm running on a list of files. So for every run, this file, right, each individual file is going to pass itself over to the backend workflow. That way, every run of the backend workflow is going to run on a different value. When do we want this to happen? Right now. There's not going to be a delay, so I'm just going to put current date and time. You can just search for current date and time here, and it will run immediately. And I've placed a condition on here because this demo application is on a free plan, so I would be seeing an error message if I tried to run it right now. So I put a condition on this where I know it's always going to fail, so that it essentially skips over the action. Little pro tip there for you if you're ever in a similar situation. Okay, so you don't need a condition here if you're on a paid plan and you actually want this action to go through, right? So that's how we can delete all of the files associated with the conversation. Again, they're coming from the messages, which is why we do the files first, then the messages, then the thread. Okay, now there's one more feature that I want to demonstrate here, which is the mentions. So I'm, again, running as Monica right now, and I'm in the sales department group conversation with Rachel and Phoebe. Rachel has sent a hello. I'm going to say, hey, at, and you'll see that as soon as I type in that @ symbol, I see the names of the other 2 members. I don't see myself here show up. I'm going to select Rachel, and it has shortened it to Rachel's first name. And I'll say, can you send the presentation from today? Okay, we'll send this message like this. And I'll also send one to Phoebe. I'll say, hi, at, we'll choose Phoebe. What did you think of the presentation? Okay, just to have a bit of variety here, we'll send this message as well. Okay, so you can see that those @ and then names are just showing up there. So now I'm going to run as one of those users. Let's go with Rachel. Okay, so we can see how it looks on her end. So these are new messages in this conversation, and we can see that for Rachel, her name is highlighted here to kind of point out that that's where she's been mentioned. All right. So the way that we've accomplished this is with the help of a plugin. It's a free plugin called Tagger. And what we're using from this plugin to make this function happen is this action right here, set up mentions. Set up mentions. So in the workflow, when my page is loaded, my step 2 here, we've already gone through this step 1, which is unrelated, but in my step 2, I'm setting up my mentions. This is an action you can find within the plugins category once you have that plugin installed. There it is. Okay. And I want this to apply to my multi-line input. I know that I only have one on my page, so I'm going to say apply to all multi-line inputs. I could also go off of ID attributes if I wanted to specify, target a specific input. And the trigger character is the @ symbol. It's very common, prefix for doing these mentions here, but you can technically do another trigger character if you want, maybe like a hashtag for tags, keywords, things like that. And as soon as that trigger character is typed in, the plugin will display that sort of drop-down list of whatever text you want to display. And so this is where you define that drop-down list. In my case, I want to show the full names of everybody in the thread that I'm in, minus myself. So I'm going to the selected threads, threads members, minus the current user, and then showing all the remaining members' first names. And as soon as I choose the name, it'll replace my selection with the first name. So I don't have to replace it with something else. I could technically leave it on full name, so that's up to you to customize. But notice it's the exact same expression with the same list, but ultimately ending up on the first name. Okay. Now, in the design, I'm going to go over to the text here. Notice that in order to display the content with those mentions, I have a find and replace operation. Okay. So I'm going to find at current user's first name and replace it with at current user's first name, but in a different color. So I've just used the rich text editor here, highlighted it, and I was able to choose another color. And once I hit save, Bubble added these tags around here. You can also just look at what the tag system is, right? It's in brackets, color equals, and then whatever color code you want. You're not just bound to the ones that are in the rich text editor. And then close that color tag so Bubble knows when to stop applying that color. So all I'm really doing is locating that at name and replacing it with just a change in color. I'm not actually changing the text whatsoever here. Okay, this way it highlights to the current user where they've been tagged. Again, you can underline it as well. The plugin also comes with a couple other properties that you can play around with, but this way you can start to get a feel for how to do mentions. You can also do extra notifications if you want, whether they're badges or emails, or creating an entirely new data type for notifications if you wanted to expand on that to alert the user to different types of alerts that they should be aware of. Remember, all of these features you can customize in many different directions. Use this as a foundation to get you started so that you understand how to think about organizing your data, right, in your database structure so that you can then manipulate that data for your designs and also your workflows to make this entire experience as interactive and as useful as possible. All right, I hope this was helpful. And if it was, the content you're about to see on the screen coming up next is going to help you take things even further.